Good morning and welcome to our special election coverage for Political Empire. I'm Kim Pearsall and I'm joined with Dan Bernstein, who is a rock star. He was here last night, very late into the evening for our coverage going into the election night, and is again here this morning with us to give us an update on what happened, because in some of these races we went to sleep thinking that something was one way when it really wasn't. And so one of those was Prop 30, which now appears to be leading in the yes vote category. We also had a couple close races that are still close that we're going to be getting to today. But first, let's talk about, obviously, the big one, the presidential race. President Obama was reelected for 4 more years, and we took a look at what the breakdown was in Riverside County and San Bernardino County, and it was kind of interesting. In Riverside County, Barack Obama did not win. That was led by Mitt Romney, and that was about 49.7% of the vote Romney had in just Riverside County. But in San Bernardino County, Obama did lead with 51.4% of the voters there. And also turnout, we should mention, for both counties, quite a bit of it was vote by mail ballots. So we had about 42% of the voters in San Bernardino County were vote by mail voters, and 55.7% of the turnout in Riverside County was vote by mail as well. So we had a lot of people voting ahead of time by mail, taking advantage of that method. Dan, talk a little bit about the differences between Riverside County and San Bernardino County, especially when we were looking at the presidential race. It was kind of interesting where Riverside County was landing on some of the issues versus San Bernardino County.
Well, take the presidential race first. In 2008, Barack Obama won both counties. 50% in Riverside County, 51% in San Bernardino County. This time around, he lost in Riverside County by 49 to 47%, and appears to be winning in San Bernardino County, 51 to 46%. So that's one anomaly there. Prop 30, of course, is carrying. It seems to be winning by about 53, 54% statewide, but in Riverside County, it is losing 56 to 43% right now, and in San Bernardino County, it is losing also 53 to 46%. Also, Prop 32, the union, the checkoff dues ballot measure, has gone down to defeat statewide, but it is winning in Riverside County, 51 to 48%. But San Bernardino County seems to be more in step with the rest of the state. Prop 32 is losing, although narrowly, 50 to 49%. One other thing I think that we should point out, we should congratulate Riverside County. As of about 6 o'clock this morning, it was the only county in the entire state not to have reported from 100% of its precincts. Every other county in the state had reported 100%. A few hours
earlier. You did not earn a certificate for that, unfortunately.
Yes, I think so. No one can come in and accept the award. And earlier in the counting, San Bernardino County and Riverside County were the only 2 counties in the state not to have reported 100%. So congratulations to those 2 counties.
And moving on, we're going to look at some of the key races in congressional seats. And what folks are talking about this morning, too, is the fact that the makeup of the Senate and the House really didn't shift much. So the power in the Senate is still with the Democratic base. The power in the House is still with the Republican base. And, of course, you've reelected President Obama. So going forward, little changes in regards to moving forward that way. So if that power shifting, that didn't change. But looking at our congressional district here, District 36, so this is the newly drawn district that primarily encompasses the Coachella Valley, the Palm Springs area. This was an interesting one because as of last night, Mary Bono Mack was with a slight lead over her challenger, Raul Ruiz. As of this morning, that has shifted a bit, and we've got 67% of the precincts reporting so far. So again, that's Raul Ruiz with 51.4% of the vote compared to Mary Bono Mack's 48.6% of the vote thus far. It's a difference really of just 4,000 votes or so.
Yeah.
So this is a close one. This is particularly interesting as well because Mary Bono Mack has rarely been challenged to this degree. She's obviously had challengers to her seat before, but never this close.
Yeah, I think this is the one where she still might be able to pull it out, but this might be the one that she eventually loses. If she does, she will join her husband, Connie Mack, who lost a bid for the United States Senate in Florida. So it would be a bad night for the Macks. Again, we still don't know definitively whether she's lost or not, but it looks pretty good for Raul Ruiz right now. He's given her a real battle, and we should say that until Mayor Bloomberg dumped about $3 million into another congressional race, Raul Ruiz was the individual who had received the most PAC money of all these candidates, more than $500,000. So he's very well financed.
True. A lot of money was going into quite a few inland elections. It was interesting. And now we're going to talk about the District 41 race, and this is between Mark Takano and John Tavallone. Here we've got Mark Takano clearly with 56.7% of the votes so far, John Tavallone with 43.4%. We have, I think, 76% of the precincts are accounted for. And we actually have video of Mark Takano talking to us last night.
Well, I hope not to be, what do you call it, someone who dampens any enthusiasm. I know we're at 21% of the vote counted, and it feels good to be where we are. But I want to be respectful of those voters who have not yet spoken. The voters have not spoken until their votes have been counted. So let's be patient. I want to just luxuriate in the feeling we have now. I'll circulate among the crowd and chat with you. But let's watch each click of the turn and see if these trends continue to do what they're doing. And be hopeful that change has come to Riverside.
So this race was a particularly contentious one. Dan and I both attended the debate between Mark Takano and John Tavallone, and certainly saw the barbs flying there. There was, of course, accusations that if one was elected, they would essentially be beholden to whoever's party was in charge at the time, that they really wouldn't be an independent voice. What was interesting, too, was the campaign mailers that came out. One in particular, Mark Takano, had recruited his parents to represent him on one of those flyers. You can see that right now. They had both been holding a John Tavallone anti-Takano ad saying that the negative attacks on their son have gone too far. That was a first, I think. I'd never seen a candidate's parents recruited to essentially defend their son in a campaign mailer. And Dan, you had a campaign mailer as well, and this one was in support of Takano. Correct?
Yeah, this was the former president of the United States made an appearance in the Takano mailers. This shows how much this seat meant to both parties, really. The Democrats really wanted this seat to head off the Republican majority, and the Republicans wanted, of course, to bolster their numbers. And I think the campaign, particularly in Takano's side, was characterized by a real adherence to the party line. Takano really embraced President Obama and the Obamacare and other issues that were near and dear to the president. I think Tavallone tried to present a little bit more moderate position. He was going to be an independent congressman if sent there. Other people I've talked to said he didn't really sell himself as a candidate who really wanted the job. He was one person told me he went to a couple of Tavallone appearances, and when the supervisor was asked why he was running for Congress, he said, well, people have asked me to run. And that didn't quite seem to be the answer, almost like they wanted to hear more. What was he really doing? So one other thing I think we should note about Tavallone is that a lot of the sort of local politics were playing out in the backdrop of this campaign, particularly the Liberty Quarry, which was fast-tracked yesterday by the County Board of Supervisors, and one of the talking points to getting this done was because they wanted to get it. Some of the people allege that they wanted to get this done because Tavallone was going to win and go on to Congress, and they wanted to get this Liberty Quarry on track before he left. Well, now it looks like he's going to be around for quite a while. They didn't really have to hurry as much as they did.
True, but you're right. Indeed, they did. They had the vote yesterday. We're going to talk about District 31 now. So this is the newly drawn congressional district that involves Rancho Cucamonga, Fontana, San Bernardino, Rialto, etc. This is Bob Dutton and Gary Miller. So this is one of those races where it was two Republicans pitted against each other. Bob Dutton with 44.7% of the vote, Gary Miller with 55% of the vote. And this was an interesting one where Gary Miller, in the beginning, was certainly being called a carpetbagger to a certain degree. He was a resident of Diamond Bar. He lived in the district that he currently serves in, and said that he was going to be moving to Rancho Cucamonga. I don't know if we ever got confirmation that he did indeed move to Rancho Cucamonga, but he certainly is winning this race. This is, of course, all of the Republican versus Republican and Democrat versus Democrat races were interesting to watch. And watch the parties, too, choose a side, because certainly one got more support from the state party versus the other side, and so forth. So, yeah, what do you think of that, Dan?
Well, I thought it was. I mean, that is kind of, I think, will be one of the memorable parts of this election. Part of it's going to be redistricting, and part of it's going to be the primary system, where you did have these races, several in this area, where you had Democrat versus Democrat. We'll talk about those in a minute, and Republican versus Republican. So. It was like a family feud, and it got very, very nasty. Probably, in some cases, even nastier than it would have been if it had been Democrat versus Republican. And here is an example of that. This is I don't know if you can see this. It's if you look real close, you can see a snoozing Bob Dutton here in this. He's a state senator, a Republican stalwart, a guy who really. Fought Democrats every step of the way. This is in a late night budget session. This is not uncommon for any lawmaker to fall asleep in a late night budget session. But the Republicans, his own party, used this against him in a mailer and also called him a big spender, which probably that would be the last thing he would probably imagine he'd be tagged with. But it was just that all-out warfare. Miller was much better financed, and there was some speculation that because there were two Republicans, and they had to appeal to this Democrat or moderate base, that maybe some of these harsh attacks by Miller would backfire and Dutton would win. But apparently that did not happen.
No, indeed. And now we're going to talk about another pretty contentious race, and this one pitted a Democrat versus a Democrat, and this is the District 35 race. So that's Joe Baca, current Democratic incumbent, and again, this was a new district, District 35. Gloria Negrete-McLeod, another Democrat. She's currently a state senator. And what was fascinating here is that throughout the race, Joe Baca was clearly ahead. He had better name recognition. He had better funding up until basically a week before the election ended. And Dan alluded to it earlier. Michael Bloomberg's, the New York mayor, his super PAC came in with gusto at the very end to support Gloria Negrete-McLeod with, I think, $3.3 million in PAC spending, again, at the very end of the race. And they put out a flurry of TV advertisements and campaign mailers and so forth, attacking Joe Baca as well as supporting Negrete-McLeod. And it seems like the primary reason for their support of this race, or their interest in this race, was Joe Baca's stance on gun control. Joe Baca has said flatly that he does support the Second Amendment, and granted, he does support gun control. That doesn't mean they're mutually exclusive, but I think his support of the Second Amendment may have put him on Bloomberg's radar.
And it's interesting. Here you've got there's probably one man in America in this campaign who cared about gun control, and it's Mayor Bloomberg. It was not an issue nationally. It was not an issue almost anywhere else. Yet here he comes with, I call it Hurricane Bloomberg, $3 million to basically turn a race upside down. And, I think it almost came out from out of nowhere. But this is an issue that meant something to him, and he had some money to spend. And I don't know that we know how many other races he waded into, but he seems to have made a difference on an issue that really never really emerged as a national issue, despite that horrible shooting in Aurora and other kind of violent crimes and mass murders that have been going around the country the last few years.
true. And I believe this race may be one of 3 that the Bloomberg PAC supported that ultimately came out in their favor. So they were victors in 3 of the races that they supported with quite a bit of money. So I guess there were supporters of Baca's at a recent rally that I went to just Friday before the election who were making homemade signs that said you can't buy the Inland Empire is not for sale. Well, it looks like $3.3 million certainly helped in this circumstance from New York City's Mayor Michael Bloomberg. So that brings us to a close on the congressional districts, the tight races. We're going to go to a commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the propositions. And there were certainly some shifts overnight. So if you thought you knew what happened last night, come back for our update, because certainly things changed in the last few hours.
And here is
We're launching the Press Southwest. Our newspaper edition, distributed in Southwest Riverside County, will include more local content and a distinct new look, starting with its new front page and its new name. More local news, more local sports, and more local savings. With the latest news deadlines in Southwest Riverside County, we bring up-to-the-date City Council and School Board meeting recaps and the latest prep sports scores. A new and improved look with a front page will highlight local news, and the sports section will highlight local sports. John Hunneman, the preeminent voice and columnist of Southwest Riverside County, joins the Press Southwest staff to add more authentic and local perspective. The most extensive coverage of local news and local high school sports in Riverside County. More values from local businesses to make your shopping more convenient. The Press Enterprise Southwest. Start your day in the right direction.
We're back, and we're going to talk about the statewide propositions now. And what was interesting is, as of last night, Prop 30, at least as of the point in time that Obama was giving his acceptance speech, Prop 30 was not ahead, but this morning it appears to be ahead with a pretty decent margin. It looks like it's at 53.9% in favor of Jerry Brown's tax initiative, 46% voted no. And on the flip side, the Proposition 38, which was the one that was kind of contradicting to this one, Molly Munger's proposition, it did not pass. So that is clearly a no on that one. 72.3% voted no, 27.7% voted yes. This was an interesting one because you saw Prop 30 promotions everywhere, and it especially got dire because a lot of people were saying, if we don't pass this, then we will not get money, we will not survive. It seemed like a very dire situation, and consequences would be had if this was not passed. Are you surprised by how it played out, Dan?
Yeah, well, the polling has been, had it winning big over the summer and kind of, but you always knew that when you ask people to raise their taxes, the gap's going to close. And in fact, I think it dipped under a majority for a while. So even up until election eve, there were always people and experts who were saying that had a chance to win. But the governor admitted he was having a tough time coming up with a message to sell this, even though it was his program and his prestige was on the line, and he definitely would have suffered political consequences had he lost. But it's tough to ask people to raise their taxes. So he was going all sorts of different messages that we've got budget reform now, or I'm not going to veto the trigger cuts. He was talking around it, but it ended up to be a tax increase that Californians voted for, which is a little unusual in these times and in this state.
When, as far as messages go, and maybe this wasn't an implicit message, but it seemed like pass this or else.
It was, and a lot of people said, you're holding our kids hostage. On the other hand, I think Governor Brown came into office saying, I'm going to be honest about this budget. I'm not going to have gimmicks anymore. I've cut all I can cut. You've got to trust me on this. So he kind of put himself on the line here, and I think that the results show that people are kind of giving him the benefit of the doubt and saying, all right, you're trying, we believe you, here's your money. So we'll see what happens.
One of the other propositions that had a lot of spending on both sides for it was Prop 32, and this was the political contributions by payroll deduction, largely had to do with unions using that funding for political purposes from people's payroll deductions. So the yes side, it was 43.8%, the no side, 56.2%, so that proposition did not pass. The no on Prop 32, folks, largely bolstered by corporations and a heavily funded union campaign. Any surprises there, Dan?
Well, I think generally unions are under attack, have been under attack the last couple of years from Wisconsin and the pension obligations that the electeds have incurred over the years when times were good. So, and also teachers' unions are taking it in the chops sometimes, especially over issues like evaluations. And so that this was not sort of a slam dunk for unions, I don't think. And so I think in a way the measure was seen by a lot of people as unfair, singling out unions under this mask or this guise that it was going to hit everybody, when in fact corporations raise money for their political activity other ways than employee checkoff dues. So I think that that might have tilted it, and there was a concerted union effort, and it paid off.
Some of the other races, we'll run through these pretty quickly. There was Prop 34, and this was regarding the death penalty, whether to repeal it or not. That was a no, and so I think 52.7% of the voters voted no on the Prop 34 death penalty proposition. Human trafficking was approved, and this, I think, allows more local control of investigating human trafficking cases. So that was a yes, and that was pretty heartily a yes, 81.1%. Also, the three strikes law. So this was an interesting one because the three strikes law, right now, the third strike sometimes can be very minimal, and someone will go away for a very long time. This one would change that, and so now that third strike has to be a pretty hardcore crime in order to have someone set away for a very long time. That was passed 68.7%.
Right. It has to be a serious or violent felony. I think this represents, I think, a change from the electorate, obviously, when this three strikes law was first passed years and years ago, and it was a much more anti-crime, crack down on the criminals sort of attitude. And California's been cracking down on criminals for a long, long time, and what it's gotten is a lot more people in prison, and a lot more money going to keep those people in prison. And I think we're seeing a change where you're getting a balance of, yes, we're going to crack down on crime, but there's got to be some fiscal responsibility here. We can't afford to keep pouring so much money into prisons while kind of struggling to pour money in education. So it's really a choice of where we're spending our money. And I think that voters decided that that third strike has to be pretty serious. We don't want a shoplifting of a Tootsie Roll to get you 25 years to life, because that's expensive, and it's just not worth it. And but I think that California voters also thought, all right, maybe we're not going to do that, but we're also going to stick with the death penalty, which was also kind of turned into somewhat of an economic issue this time around.
True, and that was an interesting one because it seemed like it was pretty clear up until maybe a week ago, and then it started shifting. So it looked like there may have been a chance to repeal the death penalty,
Yes.
but no, ultimately the voters are agreeing to keep that in the state. And now we're going to talk about a more local race. So this is the City of Riverside's mayoral race. This is Rusty Bailey and Ed Atkinson. And we've been watching this for quite some time because obviously we covered the primary where there was a large field of candidates running for this now open mayoral seat, which hasn't been open for quite some time. We had Mayor Ron Loveridge there for many, many years. Rusty Bailey has run away with this one with 57% of the vote compared to Ed Atkinson's 43%. Rusty Bailey is, of course, a current councilman. He is a school teacher as well. Ed Atkinson is a business owner and a former council member. And we do have video of an interview with the mayoral candidates, and we'll take a look at that. And it looks like that's Rusty Bailey at his campaign party last night.
Well, evening's going very well. We just got the numbers from the absentee voters, 27,000 votes in, and it looks like we've got a pretty substantial lead going into the polling place counts, and so feeling pretty good right now about my chances of winning. You know, Team Bailey put the work in to knocking on over 20,000 doors, and I think that that's a direct result of the vote turnout and as well as the percentages in my favor. And so I just want to thank Team Bailey, all of the volunteers that called and walked and stood out and raised their signs today to get the vote.
Well, I'm a little apprehensive. It's hard to figure out where the public is with their stance. We have the candidates have outlined their performance for what they'd like to see for the city, and I think everybody, both myself and my opponent, want the good for the city. We have different approaches on how to receive that. So we'll find out shortly after 8 o'clock, at least the first group of votes that come in, and we'll see where things lie. It's probably, I don't suspect the ballots will be finished counted for a day or two.
And as you saw, that was Rusty Bailey talking about his campaign as well as Ed Atkinson. And so far, the vote is clearly in Rusty Bailey's favor for the Riverside mayoral race. Dan, this was an interesting one because we've talked about this a lot. Mayor Loveridge has been an institution in the city of Riverside for so long that this is going to be certainly a different leadership realm that Riverside has not seen in quite some time. What do you think of the results so far?
Well, I think that it shows that Rusty Bailey's energy and organization really paid off. He's got a team, he calls it Team Bailey. They have been knocking on doors, thousands and thousands of doors for months and months and months. He was the leading vote getter in June, even though Ed Atkinson staked out. He, I think, declared earlier, compiled a number of impressive endorsements, names around town. This is kind of a small town still, even though it's 350,000 people. But Rusty kind of organized and was the leading candidate out of 7, the most votes then. And he just seemed to continue it all the way through. He was endorsed by Mayor Loveridge, which seemed to help, and as well as by a few other council members. He had a little bit of a hiccup when he sent out a mailer that was erroneous. He didn't retract it. And I think that that gave some, even his supporters, pause. People send out erroneous mailers all the time, but when they kind of get caught up in figures and their own votes belie what they're trying to get across, it makes people's heads perk up a little bit. And he didn't walk back from it, and I think it made even some of his supporters wonder how he would handle something when he became mayor, and now I guess we'll find out.
True, that was an interesting circumstance where he accused his challenger, Ed Atkinson, of his company of getting millions and millions of dollars in contracts from the city, when really that was the maximum amount that firm could have received. It received far less than those millions, and that would have been something that he could have checked. His staff, his Bailey team could have checked with the city and said, oh no, that's not the case. Before he sent out that mailer, here's the real number, but like you said, he didn't step back from that.
In fairness, he's a government teacher, not a math teacher.
True. We'll also talk about the Riverside County Supervisor race. This was an interesting one. It's between Bob Buster and Kevin Jeffries. And Bob Buster right now with 82% of the precincts counted. Again, this is as of this morning, 49.8% of the vote. Kevin Jeffries with 50.2% of the vote. This one is a squeaker, very, very close. As of this morning, the difference in votes was 348 at this point. So I think we're going to be watching this one. There's no decision made on this one yet. What do you think, Dan? Did you expect it to be this close?
I think so. I mean, first of all, Bob Buster is no stranger to close elections. I think he won by 17 votes at one point, so it's not over. But Jeffries is probably his most formidable candidate. He's had opposition before, but never someone who has been elected time after time after time in this district, and that's Jeffries. He's a turned out assemblyman. Doesn't like to admit he's an assemblyman. He's a small businessman, but he knows his politics, and this was a tough race. I still wouldn't count Buster out just because he's been around the block in these races before. But Jeffries, from what I've heard, has run a pretty good campaign in sort of the outskirts of Riverside, in a way in Buster's own turf, and that may have paid off. We don't know where these votes are coming from, of course, yet, but it is a nail-biter.
True. And one of the other major supervisor races that we were watching, the other one was in San Bernardino County, and this one involved incumbent Neil Derry and challenger James Ramos, who used to be the tribal chairman of the San Manuel tribe. You'll see here clearly Neil Derry with 41%, James Ramos with 59%. So James Ramos will be the new San Bernardino County supervisor for, I think, District 1. Mm-hmm. That's with 100% of the precincts counted, so that one's a done deal. And what was interesting is last night, Neil Derry, I think, was the first candidate to concede, just right out of the gate. Mm-hmm. I think the polls had probably closed for less than 5 minutes, and there was already concession on his side saying, congratulating James Ramos for winning that seat.
Yeah, really do you see, the networks do this. I think last night CNN projected California going to Obama with 1/10 of 1% of the precincts counted. But rarely do you see a candidate projecting his own loss so early in the night. So Derry, I think, was dogged by these ethical problems, especially since he came into office vying to clean up corruption. He got caught up. He kind of got a couple of felonies dismissed, but he had to plead to a misdemeanor. He said in a story he had to say what President Nixon said so many years ago: "I am not a crook." And when you have to say that during a campaign, you probably are going to make an early concession speech.
Right. And he certainly was outspent as well. Some of his supporters in his prior campaign had switched over to support James Ramos in this one. And that was an interesting thing to see, is just how much money was being devoted to his challenger. And he was getting very little traction, very little support on his side of things. So, yeah, I think he saw this writing on the wall.
Yeah.
And now we're going to talk about the State Senate District Race 31. So this is Jeff Miller and Richard Roth. This is Jeff Miller, Republican, versus Richard Roth, a Democrat. This is an interesting one because we're going to be watching the State Senate fairly closely because things could shift. And if the Democrats do get enough, this could shift the power structure there, where it'll be easier for the Democratic majority to pass things through in the state. So Richard Roth has 54% of the vote right now compared to Jeff Miller's 46%. That's with 73% of the votes counted. Again, this got pretty contentious as well with attack ads. And I think, yeah, Dan, you've got some great examples of some of the attack ads that were being mailed out to Inland Empire residents.
Yeah, this is a very, I think, a beautiful mailer. It's a photograph of someone holding a large cigar, possibly Cuban, and a nice bottle of either liqueur. It looks like a nice liqueur. And the caption is, "Where does Jeff Miller spend his time when he's in Sacramento?" The implication is that it might not be on the legislative floor, maybe among lobbyists. Who knows? But it's a Richard Roth campaign mailer, but more importantly, it's a Democratic Party campaign mailer. On the other hand, this is, again, both sides wanted this seat because it has these supermajority implications for the Senate. Roth is actually a pretty good-looking guy. He's a Riverside attorney, business attorney, husband of the president of the Riverside Chamber of Commerce. But in this campaign mailer, he looks more like a mafioso, kind of one of these seedy, shady characters that you'd see hanging out in, with all due respect, Jersey or Vegas. So they were trying to put each other, I would say, in not the best possible light.
And we do have interviews that we have with Richard Roth as well as Jeff Miller, and we'll go to those. Take a look at what they had to say last night.
First bit of results, how do you feel?
I feel great. You know, I said that if we were even or even a little bit down with the early returns, that it would be a good evening. And I'm very, very pleased with these early returns. And I think at the end of the evening, we will have a victory.
What do you think was key the last few days in terms of your campaign?
Well, Jim, it's the people. We've had an absolutely superb campaign team. Josh Walters and the rest of the folks have absolutely performed to perfection. They're energetic. They make me feel great every day, and I think that was the difference.
Well, we're very optimistic about the late results that'll be counted towards the end of the night. So we're very hopeful that once those ballots are counted, because we know they're going to come from the west side, they're going to help push me over the top. So as soon as they count them, we'll actually know what the real number is going to be.
All right, thank you.
And this one, again, interesting because Richard Roth was pretty much handpicked by the state Senate's leadership, Darrell Steinberg, who thought that this would be the best opportunity for them to gain another Democratic seat for the state Senate for, again, that supermajority that we were talking about before. So we'll see how this all plays out. Now we're going to talk about the District 47 race, and this is Joe Baca Jr. and Cheryl Brown, both Democrats. And it looks like Cheryl Brown came out with 56% of the vote, Joe Baca Jr. with 44% of the vote. Not a good night to be a Baca, apparently. No. Yeah. So Joe Baca Jr. is a teacher. Cheryl Brown is the publisher of the Black Voice News. This one, yeah, talk to us a little bit about this one, Dan. Again, two Democrats running against each other, and of course, infighting within the party. It's got to be strange, and it's got to. I wonder if people question their allegiance to a party after this, in terms of Baca and actually both Bacas at this point.
Yeah, well, I think that it is. It's in some ways this was a. You're right, a bad night to be a Baca. Both would have been. First-timers up in Sacramento. This was kind of a proxy war in a way. You had Joe Baca Jr. and his dad on one side, and you had Cheryl Brown and Gloria McLeod on the other side. And this was kind of exposed a not-too-secret factions of the Democratic Party in that area. And it looks like Cheryl Brown is going to get her chance to move to the Assembly. I don't know what this means to the. If there was a Baca dynasty, this sets it back a little bit. I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see whether that family kind of gets out of politics for a while or stays in business. I think Joe Jr. still might have his seat in Rialto, but this is a kind of a blow to that so-called or that would-be dynasty.
True. And now we're going to talk about State Assembly District 61. So this is the district with Bill Beatty, who is a current Moreno Valley councilman and a Republican, running against Jose Medina, a Democrat. This was also a closely watched race for the Democrats. Jose Medina came out with 58.8% of the vote so far. Again, this is 81% of the precincts counted, and Bill Beatty with 41%. So again, this is the district that involves Riverside, Harupa Valley, Moreno Valley, Paris, and we have an interview with Jose Medina, so we'll be going to that, and I think we were at his campaign party last night, and we'll get his take on how the election fared for him. Crowded room for that party.
I ran in 2000. I ran in 2010. I didn't win. Tonight will be our victory. Tonight is our victory. Tonight is your victory. Tonight, I do think that we are making a little bit of history Riverside. I think tonight we're making a little bit of history here at Zacatecas Cafe. It is a long history. It is a proud history. A history.
And now we'll talk about the State Assembly District 67. So this is Canyon Lake, Lake Elsinore, our southwest area, Menifee, Wildomar, Murrieta. This involves Melissa Melendez, a Republican, versus Phil Pauley, a Republican. And it looks like Melissa Melendez has 51% of the vote right now, 79% of the precincts counted. Phil Pauley, 49%. So a very close race. And this one, it was interesting because two Republicans, again, very little difference in terms of policy. So Phil Pauley, I believe, has some experience as, I think, a chief of staff or for another lawmaker. And so this one was an interesting one to watch. Anything that you have to say about this one, Dan? Any surprises?
Well, not that I can tell. I think that Melendez was kind of hammering Pauley about his inexperience of being a businessman, running a business, saying that someone who's just a congressional aide for Darrell Issa doesn't really know the nuts and bolts of the economy and how to get things going. And I think that she tried to play that up pretty well.
True. And we've summed up quite a bit of the state races, the congressional races, the state propositions, presidential results, of course. And of course, there were quite a few local elections that were occurring. And I think, Dan, we wanted to talk about the Moreno Valley race.
Right. The Moreno Valley City Council races, if the results hold, you're going to have three candidates, Tom Owings and Jesse Molina and Victoria Baca, all with ties, not necessarily financial ties, but ties to the developer Ido Benzivi out in Moreno Valley, who's done a lot of, he did the Skechers warehouse. He's proposing a huge 41 million square foot city of warehouses out there. Owings received $20,000 from the Skechers folks, and Jesse Molina, $10,000. Victoria Baca didn't receive any money from Skechers, but has worked with Ido Benzivi before. So it looks like we've got a council that is going to be, to put it mildly, fairly sympathetic to the desires and development desires of Ido Benzivi, which are huge. You might call it a more Ido Valley City Council. And this has implications not only for Moreno Valley, but for the adjoining cities. And as you probably know, when you get a 41 million square feet of warehouses, you've got a lot of transportation and environmental issues, and other cities around here, including Riverside, are taking note. They're not so sure this won't have a detrimental impact on our cities or other cities and economies, so they're going to weigh in on this as well. But it was a pretty good night for Skechers, I think, last night.
True. And definitely keep posted on PE.com to see some of our more local races. Of course, we're keeping tabs on the City of Hemet race, the Temecula races, etc. So all of those individual races will be online as well. And kind of going back to some of the things that we talked about and some of the things that we didn't highlight either. Of course, there were other races involving Ken Calvert keeping his seat, and he really didn't have much of a challenge in this one. So, of course, we didn't mention it at the top of the hour because it wasn't much of a challenge. He is clearly going to retain his seat.
Ken Calvert is interesting because a couple of years ago, he nearly lost his seat. He lost Riverside County, he lost his district, but there was a fortunate for him little sliver of his district that went all the way out to Orange County and pulled in just enough votes for him to win. And so you'd think that maybe, gee, if anybody's in jeopardy with this redistricting, it could be a guy like Ken Calvert, but the opposite happened. He got a very safe district. We hardly even have to mention his name. He's going to go back for yet another term. He's probably now one of the two or three senior most congressmen in the California delegation. And I think people have a right to ask, all right, he's been around a long time, and how does he fit into this new Republican Congress? Still is going to be a Republican-dominated Congress, but does he have a role to play? He hasn't made it to that upper tier, and maybe being a third most senior congressman from the biggest state in the country, he ought to be up there. He ought to be have a little bit more stature, and I think people in this district and people around here might want to know why hasn't that happened.
Sure, no, that's an interesting point. He has been around for quite some time. And he, again, 61% of the vote, so no question there. What's interesting is the U.S. Senator race. Obviously, this one, everyone knew that Senator Dianne Feinstein would pretty much walk away with this one. Her challenger was Elizabeth Emkin. What I was kind of surprised about was how close this was, considering there was quite a bit of name recognition behind Dianne Feinstein, not a lot of campaigning on Elizabeth Emkin's side. No debate either. Elizabeth Emkin had asked many times for a debate with Dianne Feinstein. Didn't happen. And Dianne Feinstein had about 50.4% of the vote. Elizabeth Emkin, 49.5% of the vote. That's in Riverside County. Just Riverside County. But yeah, a lot closer than I actually expected. So pretty interesting there. And again, going back to those state ballot measures, Prop 30 was approved. So that's the Jerry Brown tax measure that was approved, 53.9% of the vote so far. And then again, human trafficking, that proposition was passed. That's Prop 35. The three strikes law also passed. That's Prop 36. And other propositions that we didn't mention, but Prop 39, which was the business tax for energy funding, that was passed. And as well as redistricting the state Senate. So that was Prop 40. So any other surprises for you, Dan, in this election?
I don't think surprises. I think there's kind of a cautionary tale. I'm still got the post-traumatic mailbox syndrome. And I guess if you're if I have one piece of advice to anyone seeking public office, if you've ever taken an unflattering photograph or know of any in your past, whether you're asleep or wearing reflective sunglasses or maybe haven't ironed your shirt, get them, gather them up, shred them, delete them, because they will be used against you.
Correct. Yeah, those photos aren't going away. They will show up at some point or another. It's pretty interesting. And looking nationally, there was, of course, talk this morning because Obama has been reelected and because the status is still pretty much the same in the House and the Senate. There's going to be some shifts here and there that Obamacare, which folks had said may not live if Mitt Romney had been elected, looks like it will live. So that's going to be going forward. And there's going to be challenges going forward with the so-called fiscal cliff that is facing this Congress and this president come January. So they're going to have to work together. And clearly in this election, there's definitely divisions within the country and something's going to have to give, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think we do have some new numbers for Riverside County. So maybe we can get some of those up on the screen and see what we've got. This would be the registrar reporting in. Remember, the registrar was a little late in the game as compared to other counties. So let's see what we've got. What kind of numbers do we have?
And it looks like this is updated as of 7:33 a.m. It's about 7:50 now. So these are, more recent results. Looks like Raul Ruiz still has a 51.4% hold on his seat, whether he's running with against Mary Bono Mack, and that's 100% of the precincts reporting now. So this is interesting. So 51.4% of the vote, Raul Ruiz, the Democrat challenging Mary Bono Mack with 48.6% of the vote. Still very tight in terms of actual vote count. So that's about 5,000, I think, between the two, separating the two. So that's a shocker. I, having been born and raised in Palm Springs, I was very familiar with Sonny Bono being our representative out there, and then Mary Bono Mack being the representative for quite a few years. And she's had challengers along the way. She even had the dad from the Waltons as one of her challengers. But this is the first time she had a serious challenger. And like we were mentioning before, President Clinton came out to talk about some of these races, including this Raul Ruiz race. Maybe that gave him a bump. Obviously, the money that was funding this race, too, certainly helped.
Has there ever been a Democrat, congressional Democrat in that area, representing that area?
That's a good question. Not in my lifetime.
I know Al McCandless, a former supervisor, was a representative back when, and he was a Republican.
And I think with this new redrawn district, it may have helped Raul Ruiz because it was more about the desert than some of the Eastern Inland Empire, or Western Inland Empire. So Moreno Valley was kind of excised from that district when, before that was certainly supportive of Mary Bono Mack. So interesting there. Those are the latest numbers we have there. Let's go to the Mark Takano John Tavallone race. So this is still at 56.3% and for Mark Takano and 43.6% for John Tavallone. So no change there. That's 100% of the precincts reporting. So Mark Takano still far and away with that victory there. And let's look at, what was the other one, the Bob Dutton-Gary Miller race. That's actually San Bernardino, so I won't go to that. And then we had Joe Bach and Gloria Negrete-McLeod, which we talked about before. And Gloria Negrete-McLeod will certainly be taking that seat, which, interesting there. Maybe I was skeptical about the influence that Bloomberg's donation would have because it was such a last-minute donation. $3.3 million, a week and a half before the election ended. I figured there's no way that can really have that big of an impact, especially since she had very low numbers before. She didn't have the name recognition. She wasn't an incumbent. And yet, this absolute reversal.
I think that's one of the things we should be looking for in the sort of post-election analysis is what kind of impact that had. It certainly had to have some. Was it a game changer? Was something happening early? Was something happening that we didn't know about? Was it beginning to turn? And maybe getting to these candidates and their staffs and finding out if there was some movement. Maybe Bloomberg made that contribution because he saw some movement and he saw maybe there was some momentum she was gathering, or maybe it was a Hail Mary or a Hail Bloomberg and it paid off.
True. And the state assembly races that we were talking about before, here's the latest numbers that we have from Riverside County. The 67th Assembly District, so this is Melissa Melendez and Phil Pauley. We have Melissa Melendez with 51.3% of the vote and Phil Pauley with 48.6% of the vote. So again, very close there, but it looks like Melissa Melendez came out with an edge. We've got Jose Medina in the 61st Assembly District, so he's still holding on to his lead with 58.4% of the vote. Right, yeah, that wasn't going to be lost. Bill Beatty with 41.5% there.
One thing about that race, it was a very hotly contested. We've used that expression. Both of these gentlemen were well funded. Beatty, African American, Medina, Latino, and I think the registration really, in a way, and the demographics seem to favor Medina, and I think that that has been borne out here.
True. And no change either in the Jeff Miller, Richard Roth race. Richard Roth looks to be taking this seat for the Democrats, 53.3% of the vote with 100% of the precincts reporting. Jeff Miller with 46.6%. So pretty interesting there. And I'm not sure if we've got new counts for San Bernardino, but San Bernardino was pretty much reporting 100% of their precincts earlier. So I think we've got a pretty good idea as to what's going on here. The Bono Mac race is still, that's the one that it is.
And the Buster supervisorial race is another one that we'll be watching. That's true. Is there any update there?
Let me look at that one for a minute. Yeah, and this one was interesting because Buster clearly ran away with the primary. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting is that the unions had challenged his primary bid pretty heavily, and they seemed to be on track to oust him in the primary side. He ended up winning the primary going forward, and the unions didn't really, have a role in the general election much.
The sheriff's union has spent a lot of money over the last several years going after Buster for a number of reasons, mostly because of pension issues, and hasn't been successful. He's pretty resilient, but this might be a different result. We just don't know. It's very close.
And it is extremely close. Here's the numbers. So Kevin Jeffries with 50.56% of the vote, Bob Buster with 49.44% of the vote. And here's the raw numbers too. So we've got Kevin Jeffries with 43,308 votes, Bob Buster with 42,354 votes. So very, very close there.
Less than 1,000 votes, but that seems to be growing though. Before it was a 300 vote lead for Jeffries, so it seems to be growing a little bit. So that trend probably doesn't look too good for Bob Buster.
True. Yeah, no, that's an interesting one. Well, Dan, this has been an interesting election season in general. We had redistricting, we had Democrats running against Democrats, Republicans running against Republicans. We had a presidential race that involved attacking Big Bird and Clint Eastwood talking to chairs. What did you take away from this year?
Well, I just hope that if he wins, that Raul Ruiz will tell his constituents that he really does like Thanksgiving. He was attacked for that, another bird that got attacked. Yeah, it's been kind of, we were talking last night, everybody says this is the meanest campaign yet, but they're all mean. Little fratricide, inter-party fratricide kind of juices things up a little bit, and that's what we're going to be looking for probably for years to come now with this new primary system. And the redistricting, I think, bodes well for this area, more competitive districts. That means that we might get better candidates. and we might get more moderation, not only here but up all the way up to Sacramento, and maybe on issues that mean a lot to this area, such as UCR Medical School. Maybe the Democratic establishment will find a way to get this area $15 million a year, which really isn't that much money for a med school, whereas before, with an entrenched Republican opposition, they really saw no reason to deal with this area. So a lot of changes. We'll have to watch. It's only the first election of many, but I think that there might be some change, some permanent change, if that's a contradiction in terms, could be on the horizon.
True. And in terms of the change that's been going on, this has been an interesting election season. The election may be over, but like you said, there's a lot of things to look forward to. The impact that the Inland Empire is going to have on perhaps national issues. We've got the economy still that we're facing, and we've got, of course, the fiscal cliff in January that a lot of the nation is going to be talking about and watching their representatives to see how they act. And many issues ahead. So, Dan, thanks so much for coming in today and for talking all evening and giving everybody an insight into what this election meant. And thank you for joining us again for another broadcast of Political Empire special election issue from last night and then this morning. So hopefully we kept you updated and gave you all the latest numbers that you need. And hopefully you have a great Wednesday.